The coffee shop smelled of burnt espresso and broken dreams, much like Rachel Bennett's current state of mind. She pushed through the glass door at exactly 6:47 a.m., her hair pulled back in a messy bun that had seen better days, no trace of makeup on her face, and wearing the same oversized sweater she'd slept in. This was her strategy now: look as unappealing as possible, be as forgettable as a shadow. If she could just make it through the next few months without catching anyone's attention, especially male attention, she might survive with her sanity intact. Her best friend, Monica Patterson, had set up this ridiculous blind date for tonight, and Rachel was already planning her escape route. She'd show up looking exactly like this, barefaced, disheveled, utterly unremarkable. The guy would take one look at her, make some excuse about an early morning meeting, and she'd be free. Free from the pressure, free from the expectations, free from the possibility of getting hurt again. "The usual?" called out Dennis from behind the counter, already reaching for the largest cup available. "Make it a double shot today," Rachel replied, slumping into her favorite corner table. "I need all the help I can get." Her laptop flickered to life, revealing the harsh reality of her current existence. 3 months ago, she'd been Rachel Bennett, rising star architect at Morrison & Associates, engaged to Trevor Chambers, the firm's golden boy. They'd been planning a wedding at the plaza, a honeymoon in the Maldives, a life that looked perfect in every Instagram post. Then she'd walked into his office unannounced and found him with Veronica Chen, the intern who wore too much perfume and not enough professionalism. The breakup had been nuclear. Trevor had convinced half the firm that Rachel was unstable and obsessive. Her reputation shattered. She'd resigned before they could push her out, taking her severance package and what remained of her dignity. Now she freelanced from coffee shops, picked up small renovation projects, and avoided anything resembling a social life. "You look like you're planning a murder," Monica said, sliding into the seat across from her. How she'd managed to appear so polished at 7 in the morning was one of life's great mysteries. "Please tell me you're still coming tonight." "I'm coming," Rachel said flatly, "but don't expect anything. I'm going exactly like this." Monica's eyes widened. "Rachel, honey, I love you, but you look like you've been living in a cave for 3 months. That's the point." Rachel took a long sip of her coffee. "Your friend will take one look at me, realize I'm not worth his time, and I can go home and finish watching that documentary about forgotten buildings." "You don't even know anything about him," Monica protested. "I told you he's new to the city, runs some kind of investment company, very down to earth. He specifically said he wanted to meet someone genuine, not those artificial women he's been introduced to." "Then he'll love me," Rachel said dryly. "I'm about as genuine as it gets. Genuinely broke. Genuinely heartbroken, genuinely done with men who think they're God's gift to architecture, or anything else." Monica sighed, recognizing the wall she'd hit. "Just promise me you'll give him 30 minutes. That's all I ask. 30 minutes of polite conversation. Fine, 30 minutes, then I'm out." The rest of the day passed in a blur of CAD drawings and client emails. Rachel had taken on a small project, renovating an old bookstore in Brooklyn, and it was the only thing keeping her afloat financially. The owner, Mrs. Kowalski, was a sweet 70-year-old widow who'd given Rachel complete creative freedom and didn't care that she showed up looking like she'd just rolled out of bed. By 6 o'clock, Rachel stared at her reflection in the coffee shop bathroom and felt a small stab of guilt. She looked awful. Deliberately so. Dark circles under her eyes, skin pale from too many hours indoors, lips chapped from constant coffee drinking. Her hair was still in that same messy bun, and her sweater had a small coffee stain on the sleeve. Perfect. The restaurant Monica had chosen was called Harvest Moon, a small farm-to-table place in the West Village. Not too fancy, not too casual. Rachel arrived exactly on time, which in New York dating terms meant fashionably late was expected. She hoped he'd already be there so she could get this over with quickly. The hostess led her to a table near the window, where a man sat with his back to her, looking at his phone. As she approached, he stood up and turned around, and Rachel felt her carefully constructed indifference crack just slightly. He wasn't what she expected. Monica had said down to earth, which Rachel had translated to probably average-looking and boring, but this man was tall, with dark hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it a few times, wearing a simple navy sweater and jeans. No designer labels visible, no flashy watch, no air of self-importance. His face was striking in an unconventional way. Strong jawline, kind eyes that crinkled at the corners, a slight scar above his left eyebrow that suggested an interesting story. "Rachel?" he asked, and his voice was warm, genuine. "I'm Daniel Pierce." She shook his hand, noticing he didn't flinch at her appearance. "Nice to meet you." They sat down, and Rachel braced herself for the usual awkward small talk. But Daniel surprised her by immediately launching into a story about getting lost on the subway his first week in New York and ending up in Queens when he was trying to get to Soho. "I spent 3 hours wandering around before I finally admitted defeat and called Monica," he said, laughing at himself. She thought it was hilarious. "I thought I might never navigate this city." Despite herself, Rachel smiled. "The subway system is designed by sadists. I've lived here 10 years and still occasionally end up going the wrong direction." "Monica mentioned you're an architect," Daniel said, genuine interest in his eyes. "What kind of projects do you work on?" Rachel hesitated. This was where she usually shut down, where the shame of what had happened with Trevor and Morrison and Associates came flooding back. But something about the way Daniel asked, like he actually cared about the answer, not just making conversation, made her answer honestly. "Right now, I'm renovating an old bookstore in Brooklyn. It's small, but it's mine. The owner trusts me completely, and I'm trying to preserve the original character while making it functional for modern retail." Daniel's face lit up. "That sounds incredible. I love old bookstores. There's something about the smell of old paper and wood that feels like home." They talked for over an hour, and Rachel found herself forgetting about her no-makeup strategy, her plan to be forgettable. Daniel asked thoughtful questions about her work, shared stories about growing up in Portland, and made her laugh more than she had in months. He didn't mention anything about his investment company, didn't name-drop or show off. He seemed genuinely interested in her, in the real her, the one sitting across from him with no makeup and coffee-stained clothes. When the check came, Daniel reached for it naturally, but Rachel grabbed it first. "Dutch," she said firmly. "I insist." He looked at her with something that might have been respect. Fair enough. As they walked out into the cool November evening, Daniel turned to her. "I know Monica probably had to twist your arm to come tonight, but I really enjoyed talking with you, Rachel. Would you maybe want to do this again? There's a gallery opening in Chelsea next week that looks interesting." Rachel's instinct was to say no, to retreat back into her safe, isolated world. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the way he'd listened when she talked about architecture. Maybe it was how he hadn't cared that she looked like she'd given up on life. Maybe it was just that, for one evening, she'd felt like herself again. "Okay," she heard herself say. "Yes, I'd like that." Daniel's smile could have lit up the entire street. "Great. I'll text you the details." As Rachel walked to the subway, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Hope, maybe, or possibility. Whatever it was, it scared her almost as much as it intrigued her. Because Daniel Pierce seemed too good to be true, and Rachel Bennett had learned the hard way that when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. What she didn't know was that Daniel Pierce was hiding something too. Something that would either destroy this fragile connection they'd just made, or prove that some things were worth believing in after all. The gallery opening was nothing like Rachel expected. She'd imagined pretentious art critics sipping wine and discussing abstract concepts she'd never understand. Instead, it was intimate and welcoming, showcasing local artists who painted scenes of everyday New York life, subway platforms, corner bodegas, fire escapes covered in laundry, the kind of beauty people walked past without noticing. Daniel met her outside, and once again, Rachel had made minimal effort with her appearance. A clean sweater this time, her hair down but unstyled, still no makeup. She'd told herself it was a test. If he kept showing interest, she'd know it wasn't just about surface attraction, but the truth was, she'd been hurt badly enough that she couldn't bring herself to be vulnerable in any way, including how she looked. "You made it," Daniel said, his face brightening. He handed her a cup of coffee from the shop next door. "I remembered you like it black with 2 sugars. It was such a small thing, but it hit Rachel harder than she expected. Trevor had never remembered her coffee order, not in 3 years together. They wandered through the gallery, and Rachel found herself relaxing again. Daniel didn't pretend to understand art he didn't connect with, didn't try to impress her with knowledge he didn't have. When they stopped in front of a painting of an old Brooklyn brownstone, he asked her about the architectural details, genuinely curious about the cornice work and the original facade. "Most people don't notice these things," Rachel said, tracing the air in front of the painting. "But these buildings were crafted by hand. Every detail meant something. Now we just throw up glass towers and call it progress." "You really love what you do," Daniel observed. It wasn't a question. "I used to," Rachel admitted before she could stop herself. Before everything fell apart. She hadn't meant to say that. The wine must have loosened her tongue, or maybe it was the way Daniel listened. Like her words actually mattered. "Want to talk about it?" he asked gently. "Or we can just look at more paintings." And suddenly, Rachel found herself telling him everything. About Trevor, about Veronica, about losing her job and her reputation in one devastating blow, about how she'd stopped wearing makeup because Trevor used to complain when she didn't look polished enough, and now not wearing it felt like reclaiming something. "I'm sorry," she said when she finished, embarrassed by the download. "That was too much for a second date." "No," Daniel said firmly. "That was honest, and I appreciate honesty more than you know." He paused, looking like he wanted to say more, but didn't. "For what it's worth, I think you're incredibly brave." "Starting over isn't easy. What about you?" Rachel asked, eager to shift focus. "Monica said you run an investment company, but you never talk about work." A strange expression crossed Daniel's face, something between guilt and hesitation. "It's not very interesting. I help people manage their money, make smart decisions, nothing glamorous. But you moved here from Portland for it?" "Among other reasons," he said vaguely. "Fresh start, new city. You know how it is." Rachel sensed there was more to the story, but she didn't push. Everyone had their secrets. Over the next 3 weeks, they fell into an easy rhythm. Coffee dates before Rachel headed to the bookstore project, walks through Central Park on Sunday mornings. A Yankees game where Daniel confessed he didn't actually understand baseball but loved the atmosphere. Rachel kept her appearance deliberately low maintenance, and Daniel never commented on it, never suggested she dress up or wear makeup. He seemed genuinely captivated by her mind, her passion for architecture, the way she saw beauty in old buildings that others wanted to tear down. Monica was thrilled. "I knew you two would click. Daniel's such a great guy. Down to earth, no ego, not like those Wall Street types." But Rachel's co-worker from the bookstore project, a contractor named Jimmy Rodriguez, was less enthusiastic. "I'm just saying, be careful," Jimmy said one afternoon as they reviewed the electrical plans. "Guy sounds too perfect. Nobody's that perfect." "He's not perfect," Rachel defended. "He's just normal, nice. Is that so hard to believe? In New York?" "Yeah, actually." Jimmy shrugged. "Look, I hope I'm wrong. You deserve something good after that Trevor situation. Just keep your eyes open." Rachel tried to brush off Jimmy's concerns, but they nagged at her. Daniel never invited her to his apartment, always suggesting they meet somewhere neutral. He never talked about his friends or his family beyond basic details. And he was oddly vague about his company. No business cards, no mention of clients or deals, nothing concrete. One evening, as they shared Thai food in Rachel's tiny studio apartment, she decided to push a little. "So this investment company of yours," she said casually. "What's it called?" Daniel froze with a spring roll halfway to his mouth. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious. We've been seeing each other for almost a month, and I realized I don't even know the name of where you work." "It's called Pierce Capital," he said after a pause. "Small firm, very private clients. We keep a low profile." Rachel pulled out her phone and searched for it. The website was bare bones, just a landing page with contact information, no photos, no staff directory, no details about services. "Wow, you really do keep a low profile," she said, trying to keep her tone light. Daniel set down his food. "Rachel, there's something I need to tell you." Her stomach dropped. Here it was, the revelation that would ruin everything. He was married, he was broke, he was a con artist. Something. "I haven't been completely honest with you," Daniel continued. About who I am. Are you married? Rachel asked, her voice sharp. What? No. Nothing like that. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture she'd learned meant he was stressed. I'm not just an investment manager, I own Pierce Capital, and it's not small. We manage over $40 billion in assets. He took a breath. I'm very wealthy. Like Forbes list wealthy. Rachel stared at him. You're joking. I'm not. He pulled out his phone and showed her articles. Daniel Pierce, billionaire investor. Daniel Pierce closes major tech acquisition. Daniel Pierce donates $50 million to education reform. The room seemed to tilt. Why would you lie about this? I didn't lie exactly, Daniel said carefully. I just omitted details. Rachel, do you know what it's like? Every woman I meet sees dollar signs. They dress up, act interested in whatever I say, agree with everything. It's exhausting and fake. Then Monica told me about you, said you were genuine and didn't care about money or status. And that first night you showed up looking like you'd rather be anywhere else, and it was the most refreshing thing I'd experienced in years. So this was all a test? Rachel felt her voice rising. You were slumming it to see if I was real enough for you? No, it wasn't like that. Daniel reached for her hand, but she pulled away. I just wanted someone to see me, not my bank account. And you did. You saw me, the real me. The real you? Rachel laughed bitterly. I don't even know who the real you is. You've been playing some kind of game while I've been... She stopped, horrified at what she was about to admit. While you've been what? Daniel asked softly. While I've been falling for you. The words came out louder than she intended. I've been falling for someone who doesn't exist. The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel stood up, needing distance. I think you should leave. Rachel, please. Leave, Daniel. Or whoever you really are. He stood slowly, looking more miserable than she'd ever seen him. I'm still the same person who got lost on the subway, who loves old bookstores and terrible baseball, who thinks you're brilliant and beautiful without any makeup. That's real. That's all real. But you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth, Rachel said, her voice breaking, just like Trevor didn't trust me enough to be honest about Veronica. I can't do this again. I can't be with someone who hides who they really are. Daniel left without another word, and Rachel collapsed on her couch, tears streaming down her bare face. She'd been so careful, so guarded. And somehow, she'd still managed to fall for a lie. The worst part was that she believed him when he said his feelings were real. But if the foundation was built on deception, how could anything constructed on top of it possibly stand? The bookstore renovation became Rachel's sanctuary. She threw herself into the work with almost manic energy, arriving before dawn and staying until Mrs. Kowalski gently kicked her out at closing time. The old woman didn't ask questions about the red eyes or the way Rachel's hands shook when she held her coffee cup, just brought her homemade pierogi and patted her shoulder with weathered hands. Daniel had texted 47 times in the first 3 days. Rachel knew the exact number because she'd counted before blocking his number. Monica had called repeatedly, but Rachel ignored those too. She didn't want explanations or apologies. She wanted to rewind time too before she'd let her guard down, before she'd started to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved something good. 2 weeks after their fight, Rachel was knee-deep in stripped wallpaper when Jimmy appeared in the doorway with an odd expression on his face. There's someone here to see you, he said. And before you throw something at me, it's not Daniel. An older woman stepped into the bookstore, elegant in a way that spoke of old money and older values. She was perhaps 65, with silver hair swept into a neat bun and eyes that missed nothing. Miss Bennett, I'm Catherine Pierce, Daniel's mother. Rachel's first instinct was to ask her to leave, but something in the woman's demeanor stopped her. This wasn't someone accustomed to being dismissed. I don't mean to intrude on your work, Catherine continued, looking around the space with genuine appreciation, but I was hoping we could talk. There's a cafe across the street. Against her better judgment, Rachel found herself sitting across from Catherine Pierce 15 minutes later, a cup of tea cooling between her hands. I'm not here to make excuses for my son, Catherine began. But I am here to give you context that he probably didn't, may I? Rachel nodded stiffly. Daniel's father built Pierce Capital from nothing. He was brilliant but ruthless, and he raised Daniel to be the same way. When my husband died 5 years ago, Daniel was engaged to a woman named Melissa Hartwell. Beautiful, sophisticated, from the right family. 2 weeks before the wedding, Daniel overheard her on the phone with her mother, laughing about how she'd secured the prize and wouldn't have to work another day in her life. Catherine's hands tightened around her cup. It devastated him, not just the betrayal, but realizing that his father had been right. People would always see the money first, and the man second, if at all. He called off the wedding, threw himself into work, and became exactly what his father had been. Cold, calculating, alone. That doesn't excuse lying to me, Rachel said quietly. No, it doesn't, Catherine agreed. But it explains it. When he came back from that first coffee date with you, he was different. Lighter. He told me about this woman who'd shown up looking like she couldn't care less about impressing him, who'd insisted on splitting the check, who talked about old buildings like they were living things worth saving. He said it was the first time in years someone had seen him instead of his portfolio. Rachel felt tears burning behind her eyes. I did see him. That's what makes this hurt so much. I know. Catherine reached across the table and took Rachel's hand. And that's why I'm here. Not to convince you to forgive him, but to tell you that what he felt, what he feels, is real. My son has made many mistakes, but loving you isn't one of them. After Catherine left, Rachel sat alone in the cafe for a long time. She thought about Trevor, who'd wanted her to be something she wasn't. She thought about Daniel, who'd seemed to love her exactly as she was, except he'd been hiding a crucial part of himself while she'd been completely exposed. But was that fair? Hadn't she been hiding too, in her own way, deliberately making herself look unattractive, testing him, keeping her walls up so high that genuine connection required a ladder? Mrs. Kowalski found her there an hour later. You're going to sit here and overthink until your brain explodes, the old woman said, sliding into Catherine's vacated seat. So let me tell you a story instead. Rachel looked up, surprised. Mrs. Kowalski rarely talked about her personal life. My husband, Joseph, was a professor when I met him. He told me he taught literature at a small college. We courted for 6 months before I learned the truth. He was the head of the entire literature department at Columbia University, had published 12 books, won prestigious awards. He'd been terrified I'd see him differently if I knew. What did you do? Rachel asked. I was furious, Mrs. Kowalski said with a small smile. Absolutely furious. I didn't speak to him for 2 weeks. But then I realized something. The man I'd fallen in love with, the one who quoted poetry while we walked in the park, who listened to my dreams of opening a bookstore, who made me laugh until I couldn't breathe. That man was real. The achievements and accolades, they were just details. They didn't change who he was in his heart. But he lied. He protected himself, Mrs. Kowalski corrected gently. Just like you've been protecting yourself by hiding behind no makeup and messy hair, yes? Don't think I haven't noticed. You're a beautiful girl, but you dress like you're trying to disappear. Rachel felt exposed in a way she hadn't since the confrontation with Daniel. I just wanted to know if someone could like me for me. And he did. He does. Mrs. Kowalski stood up slowly. The question is, can you be brave enough to let him? Can you both be brave enough to be your whole selves with each other, complicated parts included? That night, Rachel finally unblocked Daniel's number. The messages that flooded in made her cry. Not manipulative or angry, just honest and achingly sad. The last one, sent just an hour ago, read, "The bookstore opening is in 2 days. I won't be there because I don't want to make you uncomfortable, but I hope it's everything you dreamed it would be. You deserve that, and so much more." Rachel looked at herself in the mirror. Really looked, for the first time in months. The woman staring back at her was tired and scared and hiding. But she was also talented and strong and capable of love, even after being hurt. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. The bookstore opening was magical. Mrs. Kowalski had invited what seemed like half of Brooklyn, and the space Rachel had poured her heart into glowed with warm light and possibilities. People marveled at how she'd preserved the original tin ceiling, restored the oak floors, built custom shelving that honored the building's history while serving modern needs. Monica appeared at her elbow, looking nervous. "You look amazing," she said. And Rachel knew she meant it. For the first time in months, Rachel had dressed up. Not dramatically, but intentionally. A simple dress, her hair styled, light makeup that enhanced rather than masked. She felt like herself again, but a stronger version. "Is he here?" Rachel asked quietly. "He said he wouldn't come," Monica replied. "Didn't want to ruin your night." Rachel felt disappointment crash through her, followed by determination. "Where does he live?" "Rachel?" "Monica." "Where does he live?" 20 minutes later, Rachel stood outside a building in Tribeca that screamed wealth in its understated elegance. The doorman tried to stop her, but she was already in the elevator, heading to the penthouse. Daniel answered the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt, looking shocked. "Rachel? What are you—" "I'm scared," she interrupted. "I'm absolutely terrified. You have billions of dollars and I have student loans. You're on the Forbes list and I work out of coffee shops. Your mother probably expected you to marry someone sophisticated and polished, and I showed up to our first date looking like a homeless person because I was too afraid to try. Rachel—" "But I'm done hiding," she continued, her voice shaking but strong. "From you, from myself, from the possibility of getting hurt again. Because here's what I figured out. You weren't the only one being dishonest. I was, too. I was testing you, keeping you at arm's length, never letting you see me really try, because if you rejected the worst version of me, it wouldn't hurt as much. But that's not fair to either of us." Daniel stared at her, hope dawning in his eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to try again. The real version. Where you tell me about board meetings and charity galas and whatever billionaires do, and I tell you when I'm scared or insecure or feeling like I'm not enough for your world. Where we both show up as ourselves, complicated, imperfect, honest selves." "I would like that very much," Daniel said softly. "But Rachel, I need you to know, you are enough, just as you are, with or without makeup, dressed up or in a coffee-stained sweater. You've always been enough." Rachel felt tears sliding down her carefully applied makeup, and she didn't care. "Take me to the bookstore opening." Daniel grabbed his jacket, and as they rode down in the elevator, his hand found hers. It felt like a beginning. The bookstore opening was winding down when they arrived, but Mrs. Kowalski took one look at Rachel and Daniel's intertwined hands and smiled knowingly. "Finally," she muttered in Polish, loud enough for them both to hear. The next few months were a lesson in balance and honesty. Daniel introduced Rachel to his world. Charity dinners where she had to learn which fork to use, business meetings where she sat quietly and observed, art auctions where single paintings sold for more than her annual income. It was overwhelming and uncomfortable, and she told him so. "Then we'll do less of it," he said simply. "These things aren't important to me, you are." But Rachel surprised herself by not wanting to retreat entirely. She started dressing up more, not because Daniel asked, but because she wanted to. She discovered she actually enjoyed fashion when it was her choice, when it was about expressing herself, rather than meeting someone else's expectations. She wore makeup sometimes, and went barefaced other times, and Daniel never treated her differently either way. In turn, Rachel brought Daniel into her world. He spent Saturdays helping her with renovation projects, learning to properly strip paint and restore crown molding. He attended community board meetings about historic preservation. He met her friends from architecture school, normal people with normal problems, who treated him like just another guy once they got past the initial shock of his wealth. "This is what I wanted," he confessed one night as they painted a bedroom in a brownstone she'd been hired to restore. "To be useful. To create something with my own hands. My father always said manual labor was beneath us, but this feels more real than any deal I've ever made." 3 months after their reconciliation, Daniel made a decision that shocked everyone, including Rachel. He stepped down as CEO of Pierce Capital, appointing a trusted colleague to run day-to-day operations while he remained chairman of the board. It freed up his time to pursue something he'd been thinking about since meeting Rachel. "I want to start a foundation," he told her over breakfast in her apartment, which he'd been spending more time in than his penthouse. for architectural preservation and restoration, with a focus on community spaces like bookstores, libraries, community centers, places that matter to neighborhoods but don't have the funding to maintain their historic character. Rachel set down her coffee cup carefully. That's a massive undertaking, I know, and I want you to run it. What? Daniel, I can't. Why not? He leaned forward, intense. You're brilliant at this. You understand the technical aspects, the historical significance, and most importantly, you understand why these places matter to people. You could save hundreds of buildings, Rachel. You could change entire neighborhoods. I don't have experience running a foundation. I don't know anything about managing that kind of money or... You'll learn. I'll help. We'll hire people who know the administrative side. He took her hands. Rachel, you once told me that these old buildings were crafted by hand, that every detail meant something. You said we throw up glass towers and call it progress. Here's your chance to prove there's another way. To show that preservation isn't just nostalgia. It's sustainability. It's community. It's honoring the people who came before us. Rachel felt something unfurling in her chest. A sense of purpose she hadn't felt since before everything fell apart with Trevor. Can I think about it? Take all the time you need. She didn't need much. 2 days later, she said yes. The Pierce Foundation for Architectural Heritage launched 6 months later with Rachel as executive director, and a mission statement she'd written herself. Their first major project was a historic theater in Harlem that had been slated for demolition. Rachel worked with community leaders, historians, and a team of architects to create a restoration plan that would preserve the building's Art Deco facade while updating the interior for modern performances. The project brought her back into contact with her old firm, Morrison & Associates, who were bidding on the restoration contract. Rachel sat across the table from Trevor during the presentation meeting, and for the first time since their breakup, she felt nothing. No anger, no hurt, just indifference. Trevor had tried to approach her during a break, but she'd cut him off. We're not doing this. You made your choices, I made mine, and we're both exactly where we're supposed to be. She'd walked away without looking back, and it felt like closing a chapter that had stayed open too long. Monica threw an engagement party for them that spring in the now thriving bookstore. Mrs. Kowalski had insisted on hosting, and the space was packed with an unlikely mix of billionaires, construction workers, architects, and neighborhood residents who'd watched Rachel transform their beloved bookstore. I can't believe my random setup turned into this, Monica said, hugging Rachel tight. You two are disgustingly perfect together. We're not perfect, Rachel corrected, watching Daniel attempt to explain building codes to one of his banker friends. But we're honest. And that's better. Daniel found her later on the bookstore's small balcony, away from the party noise. Having second thoughts? He teased. But she could hear the genuine question underneath. Not even for a second, she said, and meant it, though I reserve the right to show up to our wedding with no makeup if I want to. He laughed, pulling her close. You could show up in a paper bag, and you'd still be the most beautiful woman there, but wear whatever makes you feel like yourself. That's all I've ever wanted. Rachel thought about the woman she'd been a year ago. Broken, hiding, convinced she'd never trust anyone again. She thought about showing up to that first date deliberately trying to drive him away, and how spectacularly that plan had backfired. What are you thinking about? Daniel asked. How I tried so hard not to fall for you, she admitted. How I thought if I just looked unappealing enough, you'd lose interest and I'd be safe. And instead, I fell completely in love with you, he said. The you who cares more about historic buildings than high fashion. The you who splits checks and argues about architecture and gets paint in your hair. That's who I fell for, Rachel, not despite those things, but because of them. Good, she said, kissing him. Because that's who I'm going to be for the rest of our lives, though maybe with slightly less paint in my hair at formal events. Deal. The wedding, when it happened 3 months later, was everything Rachel never knew she wanted. Not at the plaza like she'd planned with Trevor, but at the newly restored Harlem Theater, the Foundation's first completed project. She wore a dress she actually loved, with her hair styled simply in natural makeup that made her feel beautiful without feeling fake. Daniel cried when he saw her walking down the aisle, and she cried too, because happiness like this had seemed impossible not so long ago. Mrs. Kowalski caught the bouquet, to everyone's delight, and gave a toast about second chances and being brave enough to let people love you. Jimmy Rodriguez, now the foundation's head contractor, made a speech about how he'd been wrong about Daniel and would never doubt Rachel's judgment again. Monica took credit for everything. As Rachel and Daniel danced their first dance in the restored Art Deco ballroom, she realized this was what happy endings actually look like. Not perfect and polished, but real and earned, built on a foundation of honesty and trust, with room for both of them to be their whole, complicated selves. No regrets? Daniel whispered as they swayed to the music. Rachel looked around at the theater they'd saved, at the community that had packed in to celebrate with them, at the life they were building together brick by brick. Honest moment by honest moment. Not a single one, she said. Though I do wonder what would have happened if I'd actually worn makeup to that first date. Daniel pretended to consider it seriously. Probably would have fallen for you anyway. I'm not very good at following instructions. You told me to leave, and look where we are now. Married in a historic theater that we saved from demolition, married to the love of my life, he corrected. The theater is just a bonus. Rachel kissed him then, surrounded by the beauty of something old made new again. Something broken made whole. It was a perfect metaphor for both of them. Scarred but standing, restored but retaining their original character, built to last. Outside, the New York evening wrapped around the theater like a promise. Inside, Rachel Bennett Pierce danced with her husband and thought about the